3 times in the last 25 years. The exact same chart did the exact same thing right before the exact same disaster. 2000, right before the dot-com crash pulled housing down with it. 2007, right before the crash that wiped out millions of families almost overnight. 2021, right before the correction that made headlines everywhere and left a lot of people wondering what happened to a market that felt unstoppable just months earlier. Same shape, same warning, every single time. I pulled the data a few days ago, honestly more out of curiosity than anything else, and the line is doing it again. Right now, in 2026. I'm not telling you this to scare you. I'm telling you because the people who saw this coming last time, the ones who actually looked at the underlying data instead of waiting for the headlines, they had months of runway to prepare. Everyone else found out when it was already too late to do much about it. So stay with me for the next 20-some minutes, because by the end you're going to understand exactly what this signal is, why it's shown up 3 separate times before 3 separate downturns, and more importantly, what it actually means for you, whether you already own a home, you're trying to buy one, or you're just trying to protect the money you've already worked hard for. Before we go further, I want to be honest with you about something, because I think it matters more than most finance channels are willing to admit. I'm not a Wall Street guy. I didn't go to some fancy finance program, and I don't have letters after my name that are supposed to make you trust me automatically. A few years back, I was exactly where a lot of you probably are right now, just trying to figure out whether buying a house actually made sense for me. Watching the news, scrolling through opinions from a dozen different people who all seemed to disagree with each other, and honestly not understanding half of what anyone on television was actually saying. What changed for me wasn't some secret insider connection or a degree I don't have. It was realizing, almost by accident, while trying to make sense of my own situation, that the underlying data tells a story well before the news ever catches up to it. The news reports what already happened. It's built to react, not to predict. Reporters need confirmed facts before they can put something on air, which means by the time you're hearing about a problem on the news, that problem has usually already been building quietly for a long time. This chart, on the other hand, has quietly been signaling what's about to happen for 2.5 decades, long before any anchor picks up a microphone to talk about it. So let's actually sit with it, slow down, and look at exactly what it's shown us so far, one moment in history at a time. Let's go back to the year 2001. Picture it for a second, really picture it. You're watching the news and everyone around you is talking about how unstoppable the economy feels. Tech stocks are flying to levels nobody had ever seen before. People are quitting stable, boring, reliable jobs to day trade from their kitchen tables, because it seemed like anyone could get rich just by being in the market at the right time. Nobody around you seems worried about anything, because why would they be when everything on the surface looks like it's only ever going to go up from here? That's the environment. That's the mood. Confidence everywhere you look. But quietly, underneath all of that noise, underneath all of that confidence, the underlying signal had already begun climbing. It didn't happen overnight, and it didn't make headlines while it was happening, because on the surface everything still looked completely fine. It crept upward slowly enough that almost nobody outside of people specifically tracking it even noticed it was happening at all. And then the dot-com bubble burst, and it didn't stay contained to tech stocks the way most people expected it to. It rippled outward into housing, into people's jobs, into retirement accounts that a lot of families were counting on for their future. Here's the part that gets me every single time I think back on it. No matter how many times I've gone over this history, the warning sign showed up first. The actual crash came after. There was a real, measurable window of time where the underlying data already knew something the headlines simply hadn't caught up to yet. Weeks, in some cases, months. I think about the people who were house hunting in early 2000, stretching their budgets thin because everyone around them, every agent, every neighbor, every article told them prices only go up, never down. I think about how different the next 5 years of their lives could have looked if somebody had simply shown them this pattern before they signed on the dotted line, before they committed years of their income to a decision made in a moment of collective confidence that turned out to be misplaced. That's the first time this exact signal showed up. It wasn't the last. And honestly, it wasn't even the worst. If you lived through 2008, I probably don't need to tell you what happened, because you likely remember exactly where you were when it hit, the way people remember exactly where they were for other major moments in their lives. But here's what most people don't know, and what almost nobody talks about when they retell that story at dinner parties or in comment sections online. The warning sign showed up over a full year before anyone on the news even used the word crisis. Not weeks, a full year. In the lead up, the same underlying signal we just talked about in 2000 started climbing again. Except this time it climbed faster, and it climbed higher than it ever had before, higher than anyone tracking these things had really expected. And here's the human part of that story that I think gets completely lost in most of the finance content you've probably already seen online. Buried under charts and jargon and people talking about derivatives like everyone already understands what that word means. This wasn't just numbers moving on a chart somewhere in a spreadsheet. This was millions of real families. People who did everything they were told to do the right way. Bought a home they could technically afford based on the numbers a lender handed them. Numbers that felt official and trustworthy because a professional had written them down. Made every single payment on time, month after month, year after year. And they still lost everything, because the entire system underneath them had already started cracking, and it had been cracking quietly for more than a year before anyone official was willing to admit it publicly, before any government agency or major news outlet was willing to say the word that everyone eventually had to use. I'm not bringing this up to make anyone relive something painful. If you went through it firsthand, and if you did, I'm genuinely sorry, because I know it wasn't just a headline for you, it was your life. I'm bringing it up because the exact same kind of early warning, the one that gave people roughly a year of runway back in 2007, is the same category of signal we're watching right now, today, as you're listening to this. That gap between the moment the underlying data moves and the moment the news actually reports on it wasn't random back then. It was consistent, measurable, and repeatable. And a pattern that consistent, across a gap that's significant, is worth paying attention to, whether you lived through the last one or you only know it from stories your parents told you. This next one you probably remember without me needing to set much of a scene, because it's more recent and it's still fresh in a lot of people's minds. 2021. Prices were, frankly, insane almost. Everywhere you looked, in cities and small towns alike. Bidding wars on ordinary, unremarkable homes that would never have generated this kind of attention a few years earlier. Properties selling for well over asking price within days, sometimes hours, of being listed. People waiving inspections entirely, sometimes waiving financing contingencies too, just to have any real chance of competing against a dozen other offers. It felt unstoppable again, in almost exactly the same emotional way 2000 had felt unstoppable 2 decades earlier. Different decade, different industry driving it. Same underlying feeling of collective, unshakable confidence. And once again, quietly, almost invisibly to anyone not specifically watching for it, the same category of signal showed up before the correction hit. Not identical in scale, because every cycle has its own personality and its own specific triggers, but the shape of it, the underlying pattern, was the same. The same early climb, the same lag before mainstream headlines caught on, the same collective moment, months later, of people turning to each other and asking, wait, is this actually happening again? Didn't we just go through something like this? By the time most everyday buyers realized the market had genuinely shifted underneath them, the small number of people who had actually been watching the underlying signal had already made their adjustments, quietly, without any fanfare. Some sold while conditions were still favorable, while buyers were still eager and prices were still high. Some paused a planned purchase entirely and simply waited for the picture to become clearer. Some renegotiated terms on deals already in motion, terms they otherwise never would have had the leverage to ask for. They weren't smarter than everyone else, and I want to be clear about that, because I think a lot of finance content likes to make it sound like some people are just naturally gifted at this and others aren't. They simply saw it a few months earlier than everyone else did. And it turns out a few months of advance notice is enough time to meaningfully change an outcome, even if you're not a professional trader or an economist. 2000, 2007, 2021. Same category of signal every single time, well before the headlines caught up. And that consistency, that repeatability across three very different economic environments, is exactly why I'm making this video today, right now, instead of waiting until it's already obvious to everyone. I pulled the current data just a few days ago, sat with it for a while, went back and double-checked it because I honestly didn't fully want it to say what it was saying, and I want to walk you through what it actually shows, because this is the part of the video I've been building toward this whole time. Right now, in 2026, that same underlying signal is once again climbing in a way that closely mirrors what we just walked through together in each of those three prior instances. Not identical. Again, cycles are never perfectly identical, but close enough in shape and close enough in timing that it caught my attention immediately. I want to be really careful and really clear with you about exactly what I am saying here, and just as importantly, what I am not saying, because this is exactly the kind of moment where content online tends to exaggerate for views, and I don't want to be that. I am not telling you that a crash is guaranteed to happen. Nobody, and I mean genuinely nobody, no matter their credentials, can promise you that with certainty. Anyone online who tells you they know exactly what's going to happen next, down to the month or the exact percentage, is almost always trying to sell you something, whether that's a course, a subscription, a newsletter, or simply their own reputation as someone who supposedly saw it coming. What I am telling you, plainly and directly, is this: the same early category of signal that showed up before three separate previous downturns is showing up again right now, in front of us, in the current data, available for anyone willing to actually look at it instead of waiting for a headline to tell them what to think. That doesn't mean history is guaranteed to repeat itself exactly the same way a fourth time. History rarely repeats exactly, but it absolutely means it's worth paying close attention to, the same way you'd pay close attention if the same warning light in your car kept coming on right before it broke down, three separate times in a row, in 3 different years, under 3 different driving conditions. You wouldn't need a mechanic's degree to decide that light is worth taking seriously the 4th time it lights up. You'd just take it seriously, because ignoring a pattern that consistent would be its own kind of decision. Here's what I keep coming back to, honestly, every single time I sit down to research this topic for a new video. In 2007, the people who had the hardest time weren't the ones who made obviously reckless or bad decisions. They were simply the ones who didn't have access to the right information at the right moment, through no fault of their own. They were watching the exact same news everyone else was watching, reading the exact same articles, trusting the exact same experts, and at the time, that news was telling them everything was fine, right up until it very suddenly wasn't, right up until it flipped almost overnight from confident to catastrophic. I don't want that to be you. I don't want you to be someone who did everything reasonable, everything a responsible person would do, and still got blindsided simply because the information that mattered most was sitting quietly in a dataset instead of on the evening news. That's genuinely the only reason I sit down and make videos like this one, week after week. So let's talk about what this actually means for you, practically, in your actual life, because a warning without a clear next step isn't very useful to anyone. And I don't want to leave you feeling anxious without also leaving you feeling equipped. This isn't a video telling you to panic or to sell everything you own tomorrow morning. It's a video about knowing exactly where you stand so that whatever happens next, you're not caught completely off guard the way so many people were in each of those 3 previous instances we just walked through together. If you already own a home right now, start by simply understanding your own mortgage terms in real detail, not just the general shape of them. If you're on any kind of adjustable rate, know exactly when it can move and by roughly how much, so there are no surprises waiting for you down the road. No letter in the mail that catches you completely off guard. Take an honest, unemotional look at your emergency fund. Most financial advisors generally suggest somewhere around 3 to 6 months of essential expenses set aside in something liquid and accessible. And in a period of genuine uncertainty like this one, it's reasonable to lean toward the higher end of that range rather than the lower end, even if that means adjusting your budget for a while. To get there, none of this requires panic. It just requires clarity, and clarity is something you can build steadily, a little at a time, starting today. That if you're currently trying to buy a home, you don't have to abandon your plans because of any of this, and I'm not telling you to. But you can absolutely be more deliberate about how you approach them. Try not to stretch your budget to its absolute maximum simply because everyone around you insists prices only ever go up. Because we just walked through 3 separate times in recent history where that exact belief, that exact confident assumption, cost ordinary, careful families a great deal. Get pre-approved so you're working from your real, honest numbers, not simply the largest number a lender happens to be willing to offer you, because those two figures are very often not the same thing, and the gap between them is exactly where a lot of people get into trouble. And if you're not currently buying or selling anything at all, and you're simply trying to protect what you've already built over years of work, this still applies to you just as much. It's less about real estate specifically and more about the broader habit of not being caught off guard by things that, in hindsight, were actually visible in advance. Diversification matters. Liquid, accessible savings matter more than they get credit for in good times when everything feels fine. And honestly, simply knowing that this pattern exists, the way you do now after watching this all the way through, already puts you ahead of where the vast majority of people currently are, because most people will only hear about any of this once it's already splashed across every headline and every news app on their phone, at which point the window for doing much about it has usually already closed for good. And there's one more group I haven't spoken to yet, and honestly, it's a big one. If you're renting right now and you're not planning to buy anytime soon, it might feel like none of this applies to you, but that's not quite true. When a correction like the ones we've talked about actually happens, rental markets in a lot of areas shift too. Sometimes landlords who overextended themselves start offering concessions or lowering asking rents to keep units filled, and sometimes the opposite happens, where people who lose the ability to buy end up competing harder for rentals and push prices up instead. There's no single rule that applies everywhere, because it really does depend on your specific city and your specific market. But it means this is worth watching either way, because your next lease renewal or your next apartment search could genuinely look different depending on which way things move from here. Keep an eye on local listings in your area over the next few months, not just national headlines, because national numbers can hide a lot of very different local realities underneath them.